In this video, learn how to use measured moves for better profit targets. Hi, I'm Mike Bellafiore, co-founder of S&B Capital, and we're a proprietary trading firm located in Midtown Manhattan. And I'm also the author of the trading classic, One Good Trade, and the playbook. In this video, a firm prop trader shows in step-by-step detail how he used measured moves to determine a more profitable trading exit for his trade in the heavily traded stock, DraftKings, symbol DKNG. Let's get to work on sharing these important trading lessons so you can grow your trading account.
So this was a higher time frame and lower time frame alignment wedge breakout trade I took on DraftKings last Monday. And this was prior to the whole short report that was released earlier this week. So I was able to catch the bulk of the move prior to that report, which was nice. And two things I used for this setup was identifying like the multi-day consolidation, as well as using measured moves for profit targets, as well as kind of identifying where to buy, which I'll show in the next few slides. So this is the long-term technical analysis on DraftKings, going back pretty much all the way to once the SPAC was released. And you can see pretty crazy move, but coming into this trade, we broke down from 55, which you can see is a really key inflection level. And this was one day prior to my trade, so I was watching it right in this zone. But the first thing I want to point out that I really liked was, although we did have around like a 46% retracement from all-time highs, we did print higher lows, and buyers stepped in at this $40 mark, and now we're right around this $50. So coming into this trade, $50, $40, and $55 are kind of those three key levels I'm watching. And then for the overall market, for a long setup, this is exactly what I want to see. So coming into the day, SPY was pressing all-time highs, looking pretty prime for a breakout coming off a month or so consolidation range. So for this trade, seeing SPY at all-time highs is definitely a check in my favor.
If you want to learn 3 more real-world setups that our traders use, including the simple setup that we teach all of our new traders, and the setup that turned one of our traders into a 7-figure big money earner, check out the free webinar that we're currently running. Just go ahead and click the link that should be appearing now at the top right-hand corner of your screen. That will open up the free registration page in a new window, so don't worry, you won't lose this video. You can also visit tradingworkshop.com to register for this free intensive workshop. You're going to learn more in a couple of hours from this trading workshop than from years of online education.
And now I'll get into the measured move aspect of this. So I didn't take this trade off of $40, but you'll see how I end up using this measured move later for profit targets. But this was the all-time high right around 74.50. In the first initial breakdown was right around a 1650 point drop. And then we had this kind of wide range consolidation period, followed by another round of selling. And you can see both of these sellings before buyers stepped in was pretty much the exact same range. And yeah, like I mentioned, coming off of all-time highs down to 40 was a 46% pullback. So within 50 days, it's nearly down 50%. And then these two other breakdowns, you can kind of do a measured move per se by time. So you can see each of these breakdowns was right around a 7-day period of selling before buyers stepped in. First wave was 7 days, second wave was 7 days as well. So,
wow.
Yeah, super clean alignment.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and you'll see for profit targets on the long trade, I did kind of this exact same measured move.
So both in terms of price, the move was similar, and both based upon and time, the move was similar.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to look at this as an exact science, but for this case, it pretty much worked exactly to plan. But I'll typically just look at these measured moves as more of a gauge. So if I see 7 days of selling, it could be 6, it could be 8, it could be 12. But it's good to kind of just have a gauge for your overall estimate of where price could go and the amount of time it could travel there.
Yeah, something to think about. It just strikes me that this is one of the stocks that was a momentum stock when the market was really strong. And, if anyone has a longer term view on DraftKings that they feel this is going to the moon, I apologize in advance. But this was just objectively a momentum stock, right? Fair to say?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's one of those stocks that had a bid, was catching more bids, did very, very well. Penn was one of the other ones that did really well.
Yeah.
And particularly during the stay-at-home time, one of the real winners. And it just strikes me as something to think about, Sam, which is, will a momentum stock that has had a tremendous run to the upside, maybe a run that's not sustainable, maybe a run that really surprises people in terms of how much it went up, one of the real winners during a period of time, that there was a lot of algorithmic buying. There was a lot of technical algorithmic buying. People bought because it was going higher. It went higher because people bought. People kept buying because it was going higher. There are algorithmic trading programs, and then there are even just momentum traders who are just going to buy because the stock's not going down. They're going to buy because the stock is going up, and it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy that people bought at 50 because somebody else bought at 48, and people bought at 55 because somebody else bought at 54. And it's not necessarily based upon the fundamentals or where the stock's going to be in 10 years from now or 5 years from now. It's just a trade that's working. It's a stock that's working. It's just what happens in the marketplace. Momentum begets more momentum. And then when momentum comes out of the stock, it comes out of the stock. Momentum in, momentum out. Momentum in, momentum out. And so it strikes me as, when you're studying your measured moves, whether or not they're going to be more congruent in stocks that were Momo names, were momentum names.
Yeah, that's something I haven't really looked at, but I think that would be a great point, because you can see right when kind of that whole growth bubble almost popped. Really, there's no momentum in this at all. It just kind of slowly fade. Had a few pops, but overall it was just really no buyers are stepping in at all. So I think that's definitely something I should be looking at. And then to move forward, this is just kind of a zoomed in picture of the pull into $40 on this last page. So right here, this is more so just zoomed in, showing the breakout. So pulled in, spiked pretty much right to this $40 range, and then buyers stepped up and continued, and then 45 became a pretty key level as well for this. So I didn't take either this $40 or $45 trade, but I think if you're looking for a swing trade, for like possible multi-day swing trade, if you could get entries at this $40, that's like 50% off the highs. Definitely a great entry to hold for a little bit. But as you saw with the Hindenburg report that came out Monday, anything can happen. So even if you bought this $40, you're going to be down 50% in just a matter of one news headline. But going back to this, so super clean price action off of 40 and then $45 break. And the thing that got me really interested in this was, once we cracked 45, we were holding in this kind of $50 range for multiple days. So around around 8 days, we were holding this $50 range without being able to pull back to 48. So that's pretty much telling me that buyers are continually holding price higher and willing to buy higher. Kind of like what we talked about earlier. If there's a buyer at 48, someone's going to buy at 50. And that's kind of what we were seeing in here. So definitely a change of story from the last 50 days, where buyers are stepping up and we're just not seeing every pop fade within 1 or 2 days. So now this is kind of showing all three of those slides I previously mentioned. And then this goes into the higher time frame breakout. And then the next slide, I'll show the lower time frame breakout. So when I'm looking for a trade like this, a multi-day consolidation breakout, I really want to see alignment with the higher time frame chart. So this is a 4-hour chart, I believe. And then I want to see that alignment with like a 15-minute or even a 1 or 5 minute on the shorter time frame. But you can see coming into the trade, this is 1 day prior. We've been consolidating for around 14 days, holding higher. And these are just some anchored VWAPs I like to gauge to see where a lot of these short sellers are going to be underwater. And you can see this swing high anchored VWAP was somewhat of resistance prior. And now we regain that prior swing high anchored VWAP, and that's more of a support level. So I'm also looking at those two anchored VWAPs kind of to gauge the consolidation range, as well as just looking at like the normal price.
Sam, what are you using the anchored VWAP off of?
So I'm doing it off of like swing highs that ended up being sold immediately. And then I'm anchoring it by the high of day price, because typically anchored VWAPs are like an average between open, high, low, close. But when I'm doing swing highs like this, I just anchor it from the high. So that's kind of like the highest value anchored VWAP price. So once we regain that, that's kind of telling me that longs are starting to become in control. So, I mean, you could really do any swing high, but I just like to look at some of these kind of overextended swing high pops. And then also from all-time high, but I didn't have that one put in. And so now this goes into the lower time frame alignment I was talking about. So back on that 4-hour chart, you saw we had a pretty respected long-term trend line. And now on the shorter term time frame, we're starting to form a pretty nice wedge. And like I mentioned here, this is like a textbook wedge or flag breakout pattern. 3 things I'll point out is first, the volume. So this is a volume profile that takes all the volume that is done within this time range. And you can see the bulk of the volume, so over 70% of the volume is done in the upper part of the range. And each attempt to kind of pull into this level right around 48.50 is being bought back up. And then the other thing I want to mention, or I guess I'll go to this volume first. So you can see during this whole consolidation period, volume's kind of fading, which for a breakout setup, that's something I like to see it, where we're seeing volume fade, but we're also seeing price hold higher. And then lastly, the day before the trade, you can see the previous day's price action was in a super tight range. So it was within a 70-cent range, which is well below its ATR. And it also held this $50 level, which is just a pretty key psychological level all day. So every attempt to kind of break down from it, we rebid, and we ended up closing above $50, which was definitely a change of character from these last few days. It was previously resistance. And then every other day, we kind of attempted to hold above this $50 level. One day we did, but all these other days we just couldn't really get a clean hold. So that was definitely something else that got me interested with how tight this range was and how kind of dried up the volume was. So now I'll go to, I have my executions on a later slide, but this is the breakout. So this is showing from the open to like 11 a.m., first hour and a half of trading. So this is the volume I was talking about, where we're seeing it dry up. And then on the breakout day, we see volume spike. But the most important part is we see the volume sustain for the first hour and a half of this session, where prior, almost every other day, we see volume spike, but then we see it instantly fade. So this was a huge change of character, where we get that initial volume right off of the open, but then throughout the whole morning session, we're seeing volume sustain at higher levels than the previous 5 days. And then a few things I'll point out: really clean breakout of this wedge. Pre-market little bit of a move, held higher, and on the open, we saw immediate strength. We had a little wick down that was immediately bought up. And then pre-market high and some of these previous swing highs just were really no challenge at all for the price. We just blew through them. In every pullback, so this was the first pullback, was immediately bought up. Second pullback to this $50 was also immediately bought up with continuation. So that's showing me that any late buyers are really eager to get in at these higher prices, which is a change of character that we hadn't seen, almost in the last 50 days, where this was probably like a 20% pullback, immediately bought back up. And now I'll go to the full day chart, and you can see this was a really clean all day trender. And a few things I'll point out here is first, the volume. So we can see the opening volume, but then coming in the next 10 minutes of trading, that volume kept climbing and climbing, and it ended up printing higher volume readings than the first opening candle, which for a breakout, you want to see at least a few times on each breakout that volume kind of peak over the opening volume. And then on all these pullbacks, you can see just how low the volume is and dried up. So that's another check in your favor for a pretty clean trend day. And then on all the breakouts, we see volume spike back up. And then the next thing I'll point out is these pullbacks. Every time we printed a new high of day and then price traveled higher, we ended up pulling back right around to that zone, and we saw buyers step back in. So here's the first example of that: opening range high, buyers step back in. This was more of like a technical level, 52, buyers step back in. And then this was that kind of initial swing high, buyers step back in. And then that pattern continued into the midday session, where we had a pretty long consolidation period, and then back at this previous swing high, we see buyers step back in. This was definitely one of the cleaner traders I've seen in a while, where every time it pulled back, it was pretty much textbook, where it would pull in previous high, buyers step back in, and we see some continuation. And then another check for a multi-day swing trade is this consolidation near high of day. So for the last 5 hours of trading, we were in this pretty tight, like 50-cent range with zero selling pressure at all. Volume dried up, but price remained strong near high days the whole day. And then this goes back into the measured move I was talking about for profit targets. So this was a profit targets for a multi-day swing trade and holding like a small core for runners. So going to the measured move aspect of it, this is that $45 breakout to around this like $49 range. It was like a $4.74 breakout. And then we had a period of consolidation. And then right when I see we start to break out again, I'm already in from pretty solid prices. That's going to be the time I pull out this measured move, just to get a kind of a feeling where price could go and where I definitely want to be taking off some risk. And this measured move ended up being at like a pretty key inflection level. So this was that $55 breakdown level that I pointed out on that first chart. It was also the all-time high anchored VWAP, measured move that I mentioned. And just overall, 55 is a pretty key psychological level, especially after running 5 points from $50. So that's just kind of how you can use measured moves.
For the newer guys, measured moves is the strategy of looking at how stocks have moved in the past, how much they've moved, and in your first example, how many days they've moved. And then after a period of consolidation, when they break out or break down, used those prior moves as information as to how much a stock is about to move. So you have that first measured move from around 46-ish up into the low 50s, and you measure that move. How much did that go up? Then you have that period of consolidation. Thank you for highlighting that. And then we break out of that consolidation. All right, your question is, well, how much you're long? Well, how much can it move? All right, so you can go back to that prior measured move as potential information as to how much this is now going to potentially move. And as Sam was saying, it's not foolproof, but it can be information that you learn to use into your decision-making process. And so, hey, he's using a couple other things like anchored VWAP. He's using some resistance levels. But in this case, I mean, it did move like the last up move. And in his first example, the down move was like a prior down move. People always say, well, when do I sell? When do I sell? How do I know to sell? So one of the strategies that people play around with is measured moves, particularly for swing trades, particularly for momentum names. So good. So good to be exposed to that. Sam, question for you, which is, were you able to actually hold a little bit easier because in the back of your mind you knew how much this could potentially go up?
Yeah, 100%. Just with kind of that growth aspect to the name, you with like a really solid change of character like this, the last thing you want to do is be selling early when we haven't seen these type of up moves in the last 50 days. So having that going for it, as well as just the aspect that when people see growth stocks running, they're going to chase it. So I don't want to be, I want to be selling into strength, but I don't want to be selling into like crazy strength where I'm just going to regret it or have to end up buying it higher and maybe miss out on 50 cents or just overall add more stress to the trade, just over managing it. So for a trade like this with such a nice 14-day consolidation period, I'm treating this as a higher time frame trade. So like intraday, I'm not really going to be selling too much. I'm going to be wanting to hold a core and let it play out. If it does totally reverse on the trade, then hey, the higher time frame break didn't work, but I want to leave a little bit of size on to let it play out and see if it can reach those targets. Then I can play a quick tape. So this will be the $51 breakout right off of the open. So I didn't get in right away. I was trading a few other names, but I had a limit set right around this $51 because that was really the kind of the breakout level for me. Getting in at some of these prices, you could easily get chopped around and it could just have another inside day. So I think in hindsight, it was good that I wasn't trading it initially, although it would have worked, but just for trades going forward, that's not always the case. So for this one, I got in at 51, which, like I mentioned, was kind of the true breakout level. So I'm already in. Here, I'll rewind that a little bit. So I got filled 51.01 and then 50.98. And I have another order at like 50.77 to see if it does kind of a wick down, if I could get a little more size, but that doesn't end up happening. And then a few things I want to point out is after all these up moves on the pullbacks, you'll see how clean it is where buyers just kind of step in immediately. So at this point, we're already up a full point on the session. And here I'm just trimming like tiny size. So I took off tiny portion into 51.44, which after a move like this, you're definitely gonna be able to buy it again most likely gonna be able to buy it again at lower prices. So just covering a tiny bit of risk in there. And then doing that, just taking off really small pieces also helps you be able to hold a core for the whole trade. So if it does reverse, you're not kind of stuck with the whole bag. It at least helps kind of with your mindset going in. And so now we pulled back to those 30s, buyers step back in. Now we regain this 51.50. And you can see how the momentum's coming into it. And on this chart, you can just see this pretty crazy candle at this point. Then I'll fast forward a little bit to the first pullback. Let's see. I think it was right around, yeah, sorry, I was changing around my charts a bunch. Oh, so here's the second breakout. So you can see we had that really clean move, and then on this first pullback, it was something I pointed out earlier where it got bought up almost immediately. Now we're back at 51.50. You can see I'm still in pretty much my full size. Definitely looking to take a little bit off into some of these next highs. But this is something else I pointed out, that volume that I mentioned. You can just see, especially here, the volume's exploding. It's almost near the high day volume. This is that VPOC I talked about. So the volume stepped up, a lot of buyers getting involved in this upper part of the range. And it looks like I have a few little orders to sell in kind of front running 52. This 52 is that previous swing high that we rejected at the prior day. And then something else I'll point out is just the relative strength. So I have SPY down on this corner. SPY is just kind of inside day, not really doing too much, but DraftKings has huge relative strength on the day. So there I just took off shares at 51.84. So just another really small size exit to kind of psychological exit, take a little risk off the table, but also still hold that core for a move. And so now this is a pullback where I'm gonna want to get involved on the long side to potentially re-add a little bit. Yeah, here we go. And after such a move like this, you expect some type of pullbacks. So for me, I had an order sitting at like 51.44, which was VPOC, as well as kind of the midpoint of this mini consolidation range. I ideally wanted to add more size on this pullback, but I didn't. I didn't get filled on my full entry. Yeah, and there's just a little channel, so kind of targeting this range. If this is going to be a full day trend, or at least have another wave of a continuation above 52, kind of this range right here is where I want to get involved. So I put my order out 51.44. I think I had another one at like 37 or 33. But we're coming in, and then just got filled right there on that flush to 51.40. And then another thing to point out is how fast this rebids. So there, rebid 51.50. And then we'll start to see the momentum come back in as well as the volume. And on this pullback, you can see really super low volume on this pullback compared to all these breakouts. So now we're already up 20 cents from that initial pullback. And this is almost kind of like that do or die spot for me, where I want to see continuation almost immediately for me to be confident holding the rest of my size, which we are starting to see here. Really no selling pressure at all. Coming in, regain 70s, and every time we kind of regain these whole numbers, buyers are stepping up. We're not really dropping the whole number, so we regained 51.50, didn't drop, continued 51.60, and now we're seeing the same at 51.70s. And then so here's 52. We see volume start to come back in. Took off a little, yeah, it looks like I took off a tiny bit of size in front of 51.96, and then I had to order out 52.07, which I got a partial fill on. Fast forward a little bit. And you can just see how every pullback at this point is just getting bought up immediately. And now I'm being a little more aggressive, trimming some of my size. But I still want to hold like around 60% or more for like an all-day swing. Pull back, and then here I actually got flat, but then on my executions, you'll see I end up getting back involved on the next pullback. So that was kind of an example of over managing, but you'll see in my executions I did a pretty good job of getting back in. So here's my initial entry, my re-add, and then piecing out into the highs. And then right around this 52, I got totally flat on the trade. And then kind of waited for this pullback, wanted to see buyers prove in. I was already had a good trade initially. I didn't want to kind of destroy it by aggressively buying in on this pullback. So waited for confirmation and then just kind of pieced in on each pullback. And I think this was probably my best trade in terms of exits and holding the core. So you can see it wasn't kind of like this initial pop where I was scaling out pretty aggressively. I was pretty patient on a lot of my exits and did a pretty good job picking somewhat of the highs. And then I closed out of the rest just on like the last minute of trading day, or the last, right before the close. But that was the whole trade. And two things was just using measured moves to be able to kind of identify where price could go and when's a good time to get involved. And then also the importance of a alignment with the higher time frame chart as well as the lower time frame to be able to get like a move like this where just an all-day trender and less probability of it just kind of popping and stuffing and then fading for the day.
Hey, go ahead and click our subscribe button so you don't miss any of the videos that we're producing for you in the trading community. And please take the time to add your feedback in the comments section for what videos you'd like for us to produce next and what you found helpful from this video. From all of us at S&B, train and trade well.